hood not off, and he's missing the bus stop. Oh my goodness.
Up and that thing just exploded the whole nose of it.
So everybody sees the racetrack side of racing, the part that gets on TV, but nobody gets to really see inside the shop during the week. Well, today I'm gonna fix that for you. I'm going over a work week at a race shop and what it typically looks like. Now do keep in mind this can vary wildly between teams. My experience may be completely different from what another team does, and that's okay. Every team has their way of working through the week and getting ready for the weekend. But the one thing that kinda stays true, no matter what team you're on, is you work in order of the races coming up. I know that seems kind of obvious, but I'll get into more of that and why it may not be quite as obvious as it sounds. The first thing I want to get into is the positions at the shop, what personnel we have and what their jobs are. This is going to be a very base level overview of shop positions. Like I said, a lot of teams do things very differently. A very large team would have a lot more personnel than a very small team would, but for the most part, here are the things that pretty much everyone is going to have. You have the underneath mechanic, who is responsible for doing everything from the drive shaft back, essentially. So they'll do the drive shaft, they'll do the rear suspension, the rear axles, the brakes, and all of that stuff. You also have a front end mechanic, which essentially does the same thing but for the front, so all the front suspension and the front brakes as well. You have an interior mechanic who is responsible for the stuff inside of the race car, like the seat and all the safety aspects, and everything that goes into making the driver comfortable in the car. You have an engine tuner who is responsible for what they call dressing an engine, which is really just putting on all the parts that you need to get the engine ready to put into the car, and is usually also responsible for the installs themselves. Now, you may have a body specialist on the team who would be responsible for things like the windows and making tweaks to body panels. If your team has its own fab shop, you will have fabricators who are in charge of building pretty much whatever we need for the race car. It can be anything from entire chassis all the way down to very minor things like even just templates for installing parts. From there, it does vary a lot from team to team, but you may have managers, a shop foreman, the crew chief and the car chief are pretty much always there, but they may have very different roles. If you look at one team, the crew chief may work on the car at some points during the week, and if you look at another team, the crew chief may do absolutely no work on the car, unless of course they're asked to help out with something. But if a team has the personnel to do this, it allows them to focus more on all of the notes that they've taken throughout the week, notes from previous races at the same racetrack, and all of the engineering stuff that goes into deciding what to do with the setup of the race car, both to set it up at the shop and adjustments to make at the racetrack. Speaking of engineering, some teams have engineers full-time that work for the team and help the crew chief usually decide what kind of setup changes need to be made. But some smaller teams may not have this, and it may all fall on the crew chief. Again, very team dependent here. But one thing every team will have is a hauler driver. As I've said in a previous video, these race cars do get to the racetrack over the road. You have to have a truck driver who is able to carry these things in a hauler from the race shop to wherever in the country the race is, and then back to the race shop afterwards. This sport would not exist if it were not for hauler drivers, and I feel like they do not get the recognition that they truly deserve, as they're never really mentioned or put on TV or anything like that. One other thing I wanted to mention is if you saw my tires video, I mentioned the word tire guy a lot. This is kind of just the nomenclature of the industry. Everyone in racing is a something guy. Whether you're an underneath guy, an interior guy, an engine guy, pretty much everybody is some kind of guy in racing. And this is just a word that we use for it. There are obviously women in the sport, and I wanted to go ahead and apologize for not including them in the last video. Now I'm going to go over what is a typical work week, but these can vary not only from team to team, this can vary depending on what race we just ran and what race is coming up next. It's very schedule dependent just as much as it is team dependent. So again, take this with a big grain of salt, but I'm going to give you just the usual standard week. The first thing that usually goes into a work week is Monday morning, the haulers are back at the shop, all of us at the shop will unload the race cars and get them into the shop for teardown. We will also usually unload the bottom of the hauler, which is where the toolboxes and everything like that are stored, just to help out the truck drivers, because they usually get Monday off since they just drove all weekend and put in work at the racetrack. Once the race cars are in the shop, we will start what's called teardown. This is exactly what it sounds like. We will take the car apart piece by piece. Almost everything comes out of these race cars during teardown, from the seats to all the suspension components, the engine, everything. And this is so that we can both clean these parts and inspect them to make sure that nothing happened to them during the race that might cause them to fail if we use them again later. Once teardown is over, we will usually move on to finishing whatever race car is leaving that weekend. Since it's the very next race car to load, it does take top priority. Once we move away from teardown, the fabrication shop will take over and do any kind of damage repair that may have happened during the week, even small stuff, just to make sure that that car is 100% for the next time we use it. On Tuesdays is when we really start hammering down on the next week's race car. We will work on things like engine installs and finishing up suspension and brakes, getting them bled, getting the biases set on the brakes. At this point as well, crew chiefs and car chiefs will take the race car that is leaving this week into what's called final scale. They will put it up on scale pads, see what each corner of the race car weighs, make sure that it is what they want, since this will have the greatest effect on what's called the balance of the race car, which is essentially just how it handles on the racetrack, and they want to make sure that it is absolutely perfect. They're also checking to make sure that they meet the minimum weight requirement that NASCAR has. Once next week's race car is pretty well put together, it will go to what's called a pull down, which is a rig that we have that measures the load on each tire and also attaches to the chassis with pneumatic rams that will pull the chassis down, hence the name pull down, and simulate the force of the race car going around the racetrack. All the G-forces, all the aerodynamic loading, everything like that. So that way, we can get an idea of what the race car is going to look like once it's actually on the ground, like you see when they're going around the racetrack, instead of sitting up about 5 inches off the ground like they are when they're just on pit road. Wednesday is the day that you load the race car for that weekend. That's right, all the work has come down to this. The race car is complete and it goes into the box, as they say, ready to be shipped off to anywhere in the country to put on a show. The bottom of the hauler will also be loaded. Again, that's where the toolboxes and things like that are. And meanwhile, everybody's still in the shop. We'll keep working on next week's race car to try to get it as far ahead as possible. Once that car is as far along as it can be, it will go to the dyno. We dyno test our cars every week. Every car that goes to the racetrack, except for maybe backup cars because they're not allowed to have engines in them by NASCAR rules, will go on a dyno. Not even so much to check the numbers that the engine makes, though that is important. It's more to give a test run for the race car as a whole vehicle to see if there's any issues, leaks, vibrations, or noises that need to be addressed right away before we get to the racetrack and send it out. While that's going on, there are some people who are there working on the dyno, but everyone else is working on even next week's race car, so the week after that. We try to stay as far ahead as possible because the schedule gets pretty hectic and it is pretty crammed. It does take a lot of work to put these race cars together, and the more you can get done, the better off everyone is. So whenever one car is inaccessible for whatever reason, whether it be on the dyno, on the pull down, or being scaled, we will always move on to the next available thing. Then comes Thursday. Thursday is an off day for the road crew at most race teams, just so they can get a rest day in before they travel out on Friday. But meanwhile, the shop crew will stay behind and they will continue working on whatever car is available, whether it be the one for the next week or the week after. Again, some teams are different. Road crews may have to work on Thursdays. This is pretty typical for smaller teams, but some big teams do this as well. Friday is another one that's very team dependent. Some teams will have a shop crew still come in and try to continue working ahead, whereas other teams may have Friday off for the shop crew. It just depends on whether the shop operates on a 5-8-hour day schedule or a 4-10-hour day schedule. These are the two most common in racing. Granted, it is racing, everything changes all the time, so sticking to that is not mandatory whatsoever. You can very easily work more or even less. It really just depends on what's going on that week. Now, I know I glossed over a lot of details here, but believe me, this video would be hours long if I went into everything that goes into a work week. All of the contingencies and plan Bs and Cs and Ds that have to go into effect or may not at all. It's a very fluid situation. But believe me, I will have videos on these topics going way more in depth later down the road. So as you can see, there is quite a bit of work that goes into building these race cars and preparing them for a race, even working 3 or 4 weeks ahead of schedule, just to try to stay as far ahead as possible. And unlike a street car, these are usually built pretty much from the ground up every time. But that's just one more thing that makes these stock cars far from stock. Hey, don't forget, if you like what you saw, maybe give the video a like and maybe even subscribe if you want to see more. Don't forget to leave topic suggestions down in the comments below, as that will really help me make sure that I'm bringing you guys the information you want.